All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking way past the terrifying, sensationalized global headlines of King Tut's curse to uncover a reality that is, honestly, far stranger than fiction. For a whole century now, the story of the boy king has been completely wrapped in rumors of supernatural doom. We've all heard the tales, right? The sealed tomb, the brave explorers, and that string of mysterious deaths that supposedly followed the opening. It's a fantastic story. It's gripped the public imagination for generations. But today, we're going to peel back those layers of sensationalism. Using the historical record and modern science, we're going to look at the exact ground-level details of this incredibly fascinating historical event.
I mean, just listen to this highly theatrical warning. Death shall come on swift wings. Newspapers all over the globe claimed this exact ominous phrase was discovered inscribed on a clay tablet right near the tomb's entrance. You can easily imagine how a quote like that, splashed across the front pages of the 1920s press, sparked one of history's absolute greatest supernatural legends. It perfectly played into the fears and, frankly, the fascinations of the time. But before we get completely swept away by the panic, we really need to take a step back and examine the root of it all.
Because before we can even begin to investigate this supposed curse, we have to ask, who exactly was Tutankhamun? The real story of this ancient Egyptian ruler is actually far more dramatic and way more tragic than any Hollywood mummy movie. Born around 1329 BC, his life was incredibly brief and just deeply tumultuous. He entered a world turned completely upside down. You see, his father, the Pharaoh Akhenaten, had just plunged Egypt into an unprecedented disaster. For thousands of years, Egyptians worshipped a massive pantheon of gods. They were intricately woven into everyday life and the economy. But Akhenaten destroyed those old religious traditions essentially overnight. He shut down the ancient temples and demanded the absolute worship of only one god, the sun disk, Aten. The kingdom fell into sheer chaos. The people lost their faith, the religious economy stumbled, and massive, beautiful temples were just left to collapse. Then Akhenaten died. He leaves a mere 8-year-old boy to inherit the throne and somehow clean up this monumental mess. Talk about a heavy crown for a child to wear, right? And then, by age 18 or 19, the young king's life simply ends.
At birth, the boy was named Tutankhamun, which literally translates to the living image of Aten, honoring his father's controversial sun god. But once he actually took power, he executed a brilliant political pivot to try and save his fractured nation. He made a massive strategic decision to reverse his father's disastrous monotheistic revolution. He restored the old, beloved gods of Egypt, reopened their temples, and symbolically changed his own name to Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun. It was a highly sophisticated PR move by a young ruler desperately trying to stabilize a wounded empire. But while he was trying to heal his nation, the young pharaoh's own body was completely failing him. For decades, historians genuinely believed he might have been murdered. A 1968 X-ray initially sparked massive assassination theories because of some damage found near the back of his skull. But modern scientists since revealed a much darker biological reality, and this reality was rooted in generations of royal inbreeding. His parents were actually brother and sister. This created severe genetic complications that plagued him his entire short life. He had a debilitating clubfoot that made walking excruciatingly painful. He suffered from a degenerative bone disease, and researchers even found evidence of multiple severe bouts of malaria in his remains. So he wasn't this robust, godlike warrior reigning from a golden chariot. He was a very sick, heavily immunocompromised young man who was basically just struggling to survive.
And his profound physical frailty is perfectly evidenced by one staggering number: 130. When archaeologists cataloged the incredible golden treasures inside his tomb, they also found over 130 walking sticks. And these weren't just purely ceremonial objects either. Many of them showed heavy wear and tear. It paints a very human, very vulnerable picture of a teenager who struggled just to walk across his own palace without support. He likely died from a cascading combination of this extreme weakness, genetic illness, and infection, rather than an assassin's blade.
Now, after his tragic early death, something incredible happened. Because Tutankhamun's reign was short, and because he was associated with his father's deeply unpopular religious regime, later kings deemed him completely unimportant. They systematically erased his name from official historical records. But this accidental erasure was an incredibly ironic twist of fate. Because his name was scrubbed from the monuments, future generations of grave robbers never even knew his tomb existed. Being cancelled by his successors is exactly what kept him hidden, perfectly preserving his tomb in the Valley of the Kings for over 3,000 years.
So, the boy king was dead, buried, and totally forgotten by history. which perfectly explains his untouched tomb. But what about the mysterious deaths? Let's transition from ancient history to the 1920s and really investigate the origins of the supernatural panic.
The anatomy of this lie is actually incredibly simple. It wasn't whispered by ancient priests, it was literally invented by the media. It started with a journalist on site, hungry for a dramatic scoop, asking local excavation workers if the tomb carried a curse. The workers, knowing full well it was just a dusty old tomb, smiled jokingly at the question. But the reporter decided the truth was entirely too boring, so he invented the story out of thin air. He wrote up a dramatic article, the rumor exploded across the global wire services, and just like that, one of history's greatest supernatural legends was born from a simple joke.
And as for that famous clay tablet warning of swift wings, in reality, there was no verified curse inscription anywhere in the tomb. When actual linguistic experts looked at the rumored phrase, they immediately noticed the phrasing sounded much too modern. It didn't match authentic ancient Egyptian syntax or vocabulary. It sounded exactly like something out of a Victorian Gothic novel, because essentially it was. The infamous warning simply didn't exist.
Okay, let's move to the explorers' deaths and see how this builds into a purely clinical explanation. Yes, some people associated with the tomb died. The most famous was Lord Carnarvon, the financial backer. But look at the context here. We are talking about the 1920s, a pre-antibiotic, pre-penicillin era. Carnarvon had been in poor health for years, and he actually died from an infected mosquito bite that led to severe blood poisoning. Furthermore, modern researchers have found that ancient tombs are effectively sealed biohazards. Think about it. A dark, damp room sits entirely undisturbed for 3 millennia, filled with organic offerings like food, wood, and fabrics. It becomes a perfect incubator for dangerous ancient biological spores like Aspergillus fungi. When you crack open that seal and walk in, you are inhaling a concentrated cloud of microscopic toxic mold spores that can severely damage human lungs. Combining primitive 1920s medicine with these highly dangerous trapped fungal spores perfectly explains these tragedies, all without ever needing to invoke angry mummies.
In fact, in 2002, researchers delivered the definitive scientific death blow to the curse. They conducted a comprehensive study of 44 Westerners connected to the tomb's discovery. They divided them into 2 groups, those who physically entered the tomb and disturbed the burial chamber, and those who remained safely outside. And the lifespan difference between the 2 groups? Absolutely none. 0. Entering the tomb had entirely no meaningful impact on their lifespans. In fact, many people connected to the excavation lived incredibly long, perfectly healthy lives.
And the ultimate proof of this is the man himself, Howard Carter. Carter was the lead archaeologist. He was the very man who first broke that 3,000-year-old seal, who opened the tomb, and who physically disturbed the mummy. If anyone was marked for supernatural revenge, it was him, right? Yet, he lived another 16 years after the discovery, finally passing away at the age of 64 from entirely natural causes. Whenever frantic reporters badgered him about the supposedly deadly curse, he would just look at them and offer this exact, perfectly calm reply, "I am still alive."
And there is a profound, almost poetic irony to that phrase, because according to ancient Egyptian belief, a person only truly perishes when their name is spoken for the absolute final time. To be forgotten is to face true death. And remember, Tutankhamun's enemies tried to inflict exactly that upon him. They erased his name from history, intending to kill him not just in the physical world, but in eternity.
But by brushing away the desert sands, Howard Carter didn't curse the boy king, he resurrected him. By uncovering that tomb, he transformed a frail, forgotten teenager into the most famous pharaoh in all of human history. Today, millions of people know his name. Millions of people are still captivated by his story. Carter proved that 3,000 years later, Tutankhamun is indeed still alive. Which leaves us with a really fascinating thought to walk away with today. If a curse's true purpose is to protect a king's legacy and ensure his name echoes through eternity, then didn't the media's fabricated curse actually accomplish exactly what the ancient Egyptians always wanted?